Good morning and very warm welcome to you all at the second lecture of the INSPIRE lecture series. I am Devesh Roy, Chairman of INSPIRE, Institute for Pioneering Insightful Research and EduTech Private Limited, a research consultancy and EduTech startup company which was launched last year. It focuses on research and consultancy in the areas of economic and climate change policies. The idea of organizing the INSPIRE lecture series is to invite eminent personalities to speak on contemporary policy issues and reforms. We are indeed honored and delighted to have with us today's respected speaker, Dr. Kirit Parikh, Chairman of Integrated Research and Action for Development, IRADE, a non-profit think tank that works on policies in the areas of energy, climate change, urban issues, agriculture, and poverty. A very warm welcome to you, sir. The lecture will be of 30 minutes duration and will be followed by a question and answer session of 30 minutes. Let me take this opportunity to introduce respected Dr. Kirit Parikh. Dr. Parikh was honored with Padma Bhushan by the President of India in March 2009, and he shared the Nobel Prize in 2007 given to IPCC authors. He was a member of the Economic Advisory Councils of 5 Prime Ministers of India. He was a member of the erstwhile Planning Commission during the period 2004 to 9, in charge of energy, water, and perspective planning. He was the principal architect of India's official Integrated Energy Policy and expert group report on low carbon strategy for inclusive growth. Dr. Parikh is MTech from IIT Kharagpur, Doctor of Science in Civil Engineering from MIT, USA, and also SM in Economics from MIT. He has been a professor of economics since 1967, beginning with Indian Statistical Institute in Delhi, and was founder, director, and vice chancellor of Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, IGIDR, Mumbai. He was leader of Food and Agriculture Program of International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis in Vienna for 6 years. He has authored, co-authored, and edited 30 books in the areas of planning, poverty and development, food and agriculture policies, trade modeling and planning, energy policy, energy economics, climate change, inclusive growth, and strategies for low carbon development. It gives me immense pleasure to invite respected Dr. Kirit Parikh to deliver his lecture, Strategies and Options for Net Zero. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Devesh, for this kind introduction. I don't know how do I turn off that echo. Is anyone has any idea? Anyway, let me begin. If someone can say, how do I turn this off? That would be. Is there some way to see all the participants? Oh, well, let me begin. I will share my screen and that yeah. The main point I'm making is that net zero is the way it is being pursued internationally is misleading. It is iniquitous, and India should define its own path and strategy. And I think the reason for this are equities in various forms. Adaptation in many ways is does not account for adaptation, which is really the and similarly, mitigation is those who need to grow do not have carbon space to grow. Global negotiations are language and metric are incorrect. Carbon growth rather than carbon space occupied. That is, emissions growth rather than cumulative stock of emissions already out there is the main important global warming element. differences in socioeconomic and GDP levels that mandate different growth paths, and Glasgow pushed only coal phase out when globally emissions from oil and gas are 3.5 times that of coal. So you know that there is inequity in all this, but uh, again, you will say the total CO2 emissions per year for different countries. China is very high. USA is next to it, and over many years, 1990 to 2020, it has reduced a bit, but not much. And EU has reduced a little bit more, and India has certainly needed to grow, and it is growing. Emissions per capita, if you look at it, then obviously USA comes very high, and China is still at 7.1 tons of CO2 per capita, and you can see that uh, India is really only 1.7. So we are one of the lowest emitters, and India's huge deficit of human development requires that we need to develop and that we need to grow, which would require we will need to increase our emissions. Of course, we should try to do this in a way that emissions are minimized. We are not responsible for climate change, but are highly vulnerable. India has taken many actions and announced more at last. We are saying net zero will reach by 2070. By 2030, I know these are all well known, 500 gigawatt of non-fossil generation, 50% of total energy use from renewables, India's net generation reduced by 1 gigaton, and emission intensity lower by 45%. I think India will need technology and finance. And let me tell you that the technology has to be, of course, obtained from abroad, but on reasonable terms. And similarly, finance is not, we are not looking for aid as such. We want finance in terms of low cost, low interest loans to India. We face many disasters due to climate change. In urban areas, we have a cyclone Hudud. In Andhra Pradesh, we had Jammu and Kashmir, Srinagar floods. We had Chennai floods. All these things have affected millions of people, and we have suffered this. And therefore, we have an interest in getting the world act accordingly. The dramatic progress in the world to increase energy efficiency and reduce cost of renewable power actually opens up possibilities to manage within 1.5 degree C warming. India has taken a number of measures already and given quantitative goals. The main question is, can we live within the budget while meeting human development goals? What is the fair share of India in global carbon budget till 2050 for a 1.5 degree centigrade? Because if we say that what is left of the space, very little is left. And out of that, uh, uh, what is available for us is very questionable. I think our right fair share would be something that we count from 1990 onwards. Over 8 to 10 review and consultation of research outcomes with the MOEFC and for projections of emission pathways. So Iraq has made a number of contributions to the ministry and the government's policy things. Now, what I'm going to do is the impact of living within 1.5 degree emission limit. We have explored it with a model. Now, this is a dynamic activity analysis optimizing model. It minimizes the present discounted value of private consumption over 2015 to 2050. It has 25 goods and services sectors produced by 45 different activities, 11 activities to produce electricity, and demand determined by the model with 10 rural and 10 urban consumer classes with a demand system for each class. That means, where demand is endogenous and the demand is then the whole growth path, demand and investment in various technologies are consistent. with the available resources, that is savings. Now, this is just a description of the details of the model. I'll skip that. And this gives you some idea of how the rural and urban demand systems vary for different classes. And this shows really how much money the poor allocate to different things compared to the rich, which is the in rural and urban areas. I think India's share in global environmental space, uh, how is to be done there? The German Advisory Council on Global Climate Change, WGBU, argues for an equal per capita allocation of available space from 2010 to 2050. We update available space as per RCP scenarios of IPCC. The mean value of RCP 2.6 scenario gives 990 gigaton of CO2 over 2012 to 2050. With 18% of global population, India's share will be 160. But if you look at the lower limit of RCP 2.6, India's share would be only 133 gigaton. This would be about 2010 to 2050. 1.5 scenario restricts cumulative emissions to 133 gigaton of CO2, which is the lower limit. And I wanted to see if we can live within that. And at the same time, we developed two scenarios. One is the dynamics as usual. This captures current policies. And another is a technical change 1.5. This shows higher efficiency, energy efficiency, and technical change, which means really reduction and increase in the efficiency of solar power plants, cost of plants, and efficiency of generation. So I think and not only solar panels and other things, but also battery technology. Now, what is important for India is to recognize that human development and energy access goals should be considered as non-negotiable. What I mean by is that any resource is required for human development and poverty elimination should have the first priority before we invest anything in other sectors. So, for example, income transfer to eliminate poverty by 2030, Pakka houses for all by 2025, increase government demand for construction from 2015 to 25, and assume that the government then gives these houses to the poor. Similarly, electricity is C for sustainable energy for all of the UN targets 1 kilowatt hour per day of electricity by 2015 to all out. The government makes up the deficit. So we impose that all households consume that much, and whatever they can pay, they pay, but remaining comes from the government. Now, cooking gas is a clean cooking fuel to all at least 6 cylinders of LPG per year. And government expenditure on education and health is increased to 7.3% of GDP in 2015 and stays at that level thereafter. Because over decades, the economists have argued that we should be spending much more on education and health than we are doing in the past. So, the critical assumptions are that in Dow, only supercritical coal is there. Hydro growth rate increased from 1% to 3%, and no upper bound on nuclear, solar, wind, and biomass power. The cost of photovoltaic falls by 70% from 2010 to 2050, and also batteries. Now, these cost assumptions are compared with projections by various international authorities, and we have taken somewhat less optimistic view than some of them have done. So, cumulative emissions, if you see that in Dow, it is 242 gigatons of CO2 from 2012 to 15, but in PC 1.5, we can have 119. I want to emphasize that in this scenario, the human development needs are the first thing which are accounted for. And India's share over this based on RCP 2.6 scenarios, as I said, is 133, and we are able to live within the lower bound of 119. Now, if you look at the generation in billion kilowatt hour by source, and you can see that coal is significantly lower in the Dow scenario than in other scenarios, and that solar and wind and hydro, nuclear and natural gas account for the rest of it. Now, one thing has to be recognized that even solar here, coal here, though it looks very small fractions, its level is somewhat similar to what we are using now. So the coal consumption does not go down, it doesn't increase dramatically as it would be seen in the Dow scenario. And this is important for us because millions of people work in the coal industry. And if you suddenly shut down your coal mines, they will all become unemployed and lose their livelihood and so on. We need also concerted program of R&D. We have to reduce cost of PV, not just import from others, but make our own photovoltaics with a very high efficiency and reduce the cost of electricity storage. CCS is the carbon capture and storage is also an important thing because if we have CCS or CCUS, carbon capture, use and storage, then we can continue to use coal at more or less the same level and protect the livelihood of millions who are employed in the coal sector. And I can emphasize that we have given the highest priority to close the human development gaps for 2030. India needs cheap climate finance to stay within 1.5 degrees setting. And again, I emphasize we are not looking for aid, we are looking for only low interest long-term finance. Now, obviously, this would not be provided to the private sector, which would not be satisfied with the low interest. And so the governments have to provide, developed countries' government have to provide some measure of support for this. This may not be the entire amount, but they can just say, okay, I'm going to give you imports interest subsidy of X percent for any loan that you get. I think this would really help. And other developing countries would need even more. Now the question comes is how to raise it in an equitable way. I would argue that equitable way is the country should pay based on their contribution to global warming. So if the country is warmed more, then or is warming more, then it should pay higher things. Limiting human-induced global warming to a specific level requires limiting cumulative CO2 emissions. This is very critical, and this is the summary for policymakers of IPCC and in 2021. And every ton of CO2 emissions adds to global warming. So our whole objective should be to reduce CO2 emissions as soon as possible and postpone CO2 emissions. So, I'm giving a talk. Illustrative paths for net zero should minimize the cumulative emissions. For example, suppose see that the path A gets net zero 2050, but the total emissions that it makes, the area under the curve, is much larger than B, which has a net zero by 26. So you can see that really C is better than A and B is better than A. So I think it is important to minimize the total cumulative emissions under the term till you're net zero, rather than saying I will have net zero by 2050 or 2060 or 2070. false comfort from using annual emissions as a compass. For example, if you say that projected levels of global CO2 emissions in gigaton per year uh, in years are consistent with RCP 4.5, it be 41 in 2050. IPCC RCP 2.6, it would be 12. And IA Sustainable Development would be 10. So what it will be gigaton per year will be still very large, and annual global emissions will be significant. So whereas uh, total cumulative global emissions under these scenarios would be significant, and therefore continued warming will take place even if everybody reaches net zero by 2050. So that it's not net zero that is important, it is minimizing the stock of CO2 emissions in the global carbon space that is the critical issue. Uh, why should global action, uh, aid, uh, minimize cumulative emissions till net zero? Countries should postpone their emissions, encourage negative emissions, because if you people encourage negative emissions, their contribution to total emission stock in the would reduce, and their liability should go down. Equitable burden on all countries, and I think it should be acceptable to all countries. Burden should depend on responsibility. That's what the UNFCCC common but differentiated responsibility and suggest. So cumulative emission from 1990 gigaton of CO2, and I've taken China, United States, Russian Federation, and so on. And China's cumulative emissions now exceed that of United States, and the world's total is 733. India's is 33 out of 733. So which is at least is a 4.5% of the total, and with 18% of the global population. Economists' favorite is carbon tax. Economists say, well, let's put a carbon tax, then everyone will behave properly. But 12 countries with tax rate of US dollar greater than 25 per ton of CO2, 6 countries have US dollar ton with greater than 50 per ton of CO2. Sweden has $140 per ton of CO2, and for US suggested tax rate is US $75 per ton of CO2 to reach 0 degree centigrade. With emissions of 4.8 gigaton in 2007, at US $50, 2175, US would collect 240 billion. Carbon tax, if not uniform across all countries, will not be acceptable. But countries would say, look, I am putting a very high tax and you are putting low. My industry's competitiveness is affected, and then this is not what I can live with. So people would want all countries to have the same tax. Alternative for global action is cap and trade has not been accepted as no consensus on allocation of caps. The whole idea of cap and trade is every country has a cap on total emissions or annual emissions, and that it can emit less or more, and depending on the surplus or deficit, it can trade. But this has not found traction because there is no acceptance on the cap that the country should have. We suggest an annual tax of $1 per ton of CO2 parked in the global environmental space since 1990. Our proposal does not require any allocation. It will incentivize countries to postpone emissions and encourage negative emissions. Its acceptability will depend on what is done with the tax revenue. Who will pay what? As per the shares in the cumulative emissions till 2017, US would pay US dollar 147 billion compared to 40 with their tax of $50 a ton for CO2. And China, US dollar 149 billion, and India will pay US dollar 33 billion. The annual global collection will be more than US dollar 700 billion. So that should be enough to finance this. Now, What to do with the revenue, that is the critical thing. We'd suggest that a large part of, say, 80% or more could be utilized domestically by the country to support ambitious domestic actions. But they can given that money back only if they have ambitious domestic action. A fixed share should go to the Green Climate Fund for supporting poorer countries for mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. A small share should go for global governance to support innovations and to ensure access to all countries by buying patents, for collective action against disaster, for building up global resilience, and for capacity building in urban agriculture and food sectors. What the implementation challenge? How to allocate funds? GEF, Global Environmental Facility, and CDM, Clean Development Mechanism, has worked out ways to assess cost of action, and this could be used to compensate countries. Timely and verifiable data is critical. However, for determining tax amount, one can use 2-year-old data. Thus, for 2020 tax, we can use emissions till 2017 or 2018. Global sinks can be accounted in an updating cumulative stock. The share of global sinks will have to be allocated to countries. To conclude, a small parking fee of $1 per ton of CO2 can collect more than $700 billion annually and raise climate finance equitably. It will incentivize countries to postpone their emissions, to do negative emissions, increase climate action to get more rebate. Accounting for the stock of emissions by all countries is a scientific, fair, and equitable way to ensure action and raise needed climate finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
I think I have stayed within my time limit.
It's all right. I think it's before time. Less than half an hour. It's all right, sir. And thank you very much for this very insightful and thought-provoking lecture. And at this time, I would request the participants to raise questions to Dr. Parikh. Yes.
Dr. Parikh, thank you very much for such a good, comprehensive kind of summary of where we are and what we need to do. I would like your you presented basically a historical kind of liability regime that 733 gigatons of carbon is there generated, whoever generated must pay, and that can be utilized for taking a lot of action, including carbon capture, etc. You're aware, I think nobody knows better than you, the talk of the developed countries giving some sort of carbon crime-based assistance, so to say, this $100 billion per annum, which was suggested in 2008-9 Copenhagen, 13 years have gone. Forget 100 billion, not even 15 billion has been collected in total. Green Climate Fund, etc., is are sort of why gasping for the breath to survive. So, in this factual situation, does it really have any sort of sense that this is likely to happen or there is absolutely no chance of such a thing happening? Now that's my question one, and I'll just complete the second question also, and then I would request you to answer. Now, if we conclude that these advanced countries are unlikely to pay for what their historical crimes are, so to say, in terms of climate, what is the way for India, which is rightful developmental ambition, if it is not coming, and basically, as we all know, the climate change or the carbon is largely because of the fossil fuels. Globally, we use about 15 to 16 billion tons of fossil fuel every year. That generates about 50 billion tons of carbon. And we can rely on the carbon generating fuels, fossil fuels. China didn't care, and they have enormously expanded the use of fossil fuels. Now overtaking, having overtaken even in terms of accumulated carbon. Now, India had also this choice always to do it. No one had stopped it, though there were voices going around. But India could not even utilize the coal which it has, a lot of it, and still depend on the import of coal. So the question I have is that fossil fuel based strategy for development, is it actually a good strategy for India, or with now the renewables, wind, solar, and this, having become very competitive and having much bigger potential to be competitive, should we also alter in our own interest from a fossil fuel based strategy to a renewables based energy strategy? So these are my two questions to you. Thank you very much. Have we lost Dr. Parikh?
He's there, but seem to have disconnected. I'm trying to call him.
Oh, now even the screen is gone.
Screen has also gone.
He actually had two screens. Maybe that was the reason why there was also some echoing at his end.
I think I'll restart. Let me try again.
Okay, he's there.
Yeah, I've been trying to contact him, and I think it'll take about 5 minutes or so. I'll just try and get back. Once again.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I had a power failure here
Oh,
and it
okay.
just came back. So I've logged in again. Uh, the last thing I heard was from
Uh,
Mr.
Siddharth.
Subhas Garg, and he had raised a number of very important questions. So let me first deal with them, and then we can go further. I think it is true that developed countries are not going to accept any kind of a tax on them. Uh, what I'm arguing here is that, look, this is going to happen in anything. If all rich people in any country would oppose any tax that is equalizing, and yet countries do impose tax. Second point, I would say, so they are not that the way I have suggested, if 733 billion, if you consider, and out of this 80% is given back to the country itself, then what you are raising is only about 56 billion for other countries. So that is really a small amount, and this is less than the 100 billion that they have promised, but they are not delivering it. And of course, they are saying that, well, private sector will do it. But private sector money is not really adequate because we want low interest loans. Private sector is not going to give you low interest long-term loans. And therefore, 53 billion can be used to give interest subsidies and so make sure the private sector can give more money and we can go forward with that thing. So this would be my considerations that yes, if you bring this out to people that look, 80% of the money is coming back to you for your climate action. So if you are really serious about climate, you should not have any objection to this thing, you know, and that is what the whole scheme is about.
Okay.
Other questions may have been raised which I completely missed because there was a total power failure here. It just came back, and it took some time for my internet to get on the going again. So please, I know you might have to repeat these questions, and we can extend this by about 10-15 minutes beyond 12 o'clock. So
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Can. There is a question, Anamika.
Good morning, sir. I actually had a question with regard to the current Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 that the United States has passed. And I personally think that it is kind of a revolutionary act, irrespective of the flaws that it has with regard to fossil fuels and oil extraction still. However, I feel like it's an interesting act to have, in a way, proven to have moved from an egocentric to a more ecocentric inclined uh, look towards climate change and environment. And I feel like it is something that a lot of something which European Union as well as a lot of developed and developing countries can take as an example. So can you suggest if how India can take the US climate bill as an example to move forward to ensure development as well as protection and preservation of environment and reduction of carbon emissions? Thank you.
yeah, my feeling is that if the right kind of technical progress which everybody is expecting in terms of cost reduction of solar power and battery storage takes place, then much of the fossil fuels will become obsolete. You would not, it will be economically unviable for someone to build up a fossil fuel plant when you can build a cheaper plant from using this. So at least from an entrepreneurial point of view, there will be economic obsolescence can take place. So that's one way of going about it, so that we could say, okay, we don't need to I mean, we should really concentrate on technological development, and that would really be the right kind of incentives to countries. Now, India has taken even more steps than what the US is suggesting, in my opinion. Fossil fuel, we have strong incentives ourselves to reduce fossil fuel consumption. There are two reasons for it. One is that carbon coal use puts a lot of environmental stress on cities in India. Not only coal, but also diesel and petrol. So we are also so much dependent on diesel and petrol because we are really importing 85% of our consumption of petroleum products is based on imported crude. So we have our own incentive to reduce use of fossil fuel. And I think the whole push for electric vehicles and electrification of railways, of various kinds of support for electric renewables is really a measure. And if you want to go to net zero, we will have to cut down on the use of fossil fuels. So I don't think we need any strong measures excepting to see how we can make uh, electric vehicles and other technologies did. We have also taken a green hydrogen mission, which will then help you hard to abate sector. That is some of the industries using coal or fossil fuel, which cannot easily be substituted by electricity, but they can be substituted by using hydrogen. And if you can make green hydrogen, that is hydrogen from renewable energy, then you are really cutting down use of fossil fuel as well as cutting down emissions.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Rajan.
Mr. Rajan Parikh.
Good morning, sir. My name is Rajan. The question I have for you, sir, is that, on one hand, we have this very ambitious plan to be a $5 trillion economy. And, to get there, I think a lot of the other countries have already, made their mark on that one. So how don't you think that just depending only on crude import and sort of trying to say no to fossil fuel, because if you look at the history of all these countries, they started off with fossil fuel, abused it, and got there. Uh, do you think that it will be a achievable target, or to say that we will not utilize all forms of fuel available, because that will be a contributor in our entire development to achieve those kind of numbers? So don't you think that at some point in time, I mean, we will have to, even a country like Australia, I think we've been importing coal from Australia. And they have got large reserves of coal as well. So somewhere this fossil fuel complete elimination, is that a reality, or is it just a mirage?
No, if you see in our scenarios to 2050 emissions, I mean fuel use, we saw that a substantial amount of coal was continuing, and also some uh, gas was there. I think in many other, and if you have coal with carbon capture and storage, then it is somewhat cleaner coal. Uh, uh, on the other hand, if you say we are using not just solar, we are using solar, but wind, hydro, nuclear. So all sources of fuels are being used, and we have to use them because there is no way you can just rely on one particular source of fuel.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. And my last question, if you would allow me to, it might sound a bit frivolous, but how serious is the entire world on this matter? And this question, it find its roots in the recent Davos meeting, wherein, if you just compare an A380, which takes 500 plus passengers, then if you do the math of the carbon footprint per passenger, it's sort of pardonable or allowable. They had in excess of 1,000 jets, private jets carrying between 1 and 5 people coming into Davos, and they're all coming to discuss the same thing. So how serious is the globe really on this rather important topic?
No, I think certainly many individuals are not serious. certainly lots of people in the United States do not even believe that global warming is a threat. So there are also many deniers like that. What can persuade them? I think extreme events can persuade them. If, for example, US suffers from lots of droughts and hot spells and even cold, frost, and so on, all this will happen, then people will begin to ask the question, what is causing this? That is clearly climate change that is now becoming very visible to all. It is not something that we were expecting 50 or 100 years down the line, but it is happening today. We can see its impact today. And many countries have seen this. India, for example, the latest heat wave caused a drop in our food production of 10-15% of yield. And that's a significant amount of reduction in our wheat yield or in our other grain yield and so on. And that's really a significant loss that one sees. So you recognize that something is happening and that we need to act on it. Adaptation is one thing, defensive measures is another, and one country by itself cannot do this. So it has to be a global understanding and global act. Now, there are lots of people in the world who think it is a global action should be done. There are lots of NGOs who push extreme global action, which we should be aware of beware of, because we should not really follow blindly what people are, some of these committed, passionate NGOs suggest to you. Uh, for example, look what they suggested to Sri Lanka. Stop using chemical fertilizers. They did that and 30% reduction in agricultural product took place. And Sri Lanka went through is in a huge crisis. So I think we should follow everything. We should listen to people, but we should wisely act upon them.
Thank you, sir. Your answers were very enlightening.
Any other question, please? Anybody else would like to ask a question?
Well, I'm delighted that nobody has any questions. But okay.
One thing which the Russian-Ukraine war that has led to energy crisis in Europe and elsewhere. And energy crisis basically is fuel of the fossil fuel energy. So should the European countries and other countries should now push for your green energy with this crisis, taking into account the crisis?
Yeah, you see, I mean, the transition to clean energy cannot be done overnight. It requires time. So as you can see, the uh, crude oil prices have gone up significantly, and it has affected not just India's, economies of all countries and around the world adversely. And this is just an outcome of one man's whim, you might say, uh, that he wanted to attack Ukraine and so on. But whatever it is, the problem has become even their export of wheat had stopped for some time, and the international prices of food grains have gone up. Now, India should really has started importing more crude from the Soviet Union at lower terms. We were earlier importing crude in rupee terms from Iran, but under US pressure and so on, we gave it up. And I think that was a mistake, in my opinion. We should have continued to import uh, crude oil and under rupee from Iran, because rupee will be a barter trade. So at least then we will pay through our exports. And I think that's what we need to worry about. But clearly, this huge volatility in international crude prices is a big stimulus for going for renewable energy.
Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else who would like